3 lighthouse keepers vanished from a remote Scottish island in December of 1900. They were never found. Their bodies were never recovered. The lighthouse log contained entries that made no sense. The table was set for a meal no one ate. A chair lay overturned on the stone floor, and 100 years of investigation have produced 100 theories and not one answer. The Flannan Isles are a cluster of 7 uninhabited rocks in the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. The largest is called Eilean Mòr. It rises 200 feet out of the North Atlantic like a gray fang of granite. Nothing grows there except moss and the memory of what happened. The lighthouse was built in 1899. It stood 74 feet tall atop a cliff that dropped sheer into the sea. It was considered one of the finest lighthouses in the Northern Lighthouse Board. A modern miracle of engineering on a rock that God had forgotten. 3 men were assigned to keep the light burning. James Ducat was the principal keeper. He was 43 years old with a wife and 4 children waiting on the mainland. Thomas Marshall was the second assistant. He was 28 years old and had served in lighthouses since he was a teenager. Donald MacArthur was the occasional keeper. He was 40 years old and was filling in for a colleague who had fallen ill. MacArthur had not been scheduled to be on Eilean Mòr that winter. He volunteered to take the shift. That decision saved no one. 3 keepers was the standard complement for a remote lighthouse station. 1 man was always on watch to tend the light. The other 2 slept or maintained the station. Every night the lamp burned at the top of the tower. Every night the beam swept across 24 miles of dark Atlantic water. Sailors in the Minch saw Eilean Mòr's light and knew they would not die on the rocks. On December 7, 1900, a passing ship noticed something wrong. The light was not burning. The captain of the SS Archer logged the observation. A light that had never gone dark since its first ignition was suddenly absent. Bad weather prevented an immediate investigation. The relief vessel Hesperus could not reach the island for 11 days. On December 26, the Hesperus finally approached Eilean Mòr through heavy gray seas. The relief keeper Joseph Moore was on board. He was the man scheduled to replace one of the missing keepers. As the Hesperus drew near the island, the crew noticed several things that made no sense. The flagstaff was bare. No flag flew from the mast that always displayed the Northern Lighthouse Board colors. The landing platform was empty. The usual crates and equipment that should have been stacked on the dock were gone. No one came out to greet the ship. The lighthouse was visible against the gray December sky. The lamp was dark. The windows showed no light and no movement. Moore was put ashore in a small boat. The sea was rough and the landing was dangerous. He climbed the steep stone steps to the lighthouse alone. The gate to the compound was closed but not locked. The door to the living quarters was also closed but not fastened. Moore pushed the door open and stepped inside. The first thing he noticed was the cold. The fire in the hearth was long dead. The ashes were gray and cold. The second thing he noticed was the food. A meal sat on the table in the kitchen. Plates were set for 3 men. A chair was overturned on the flagstone floor. The meat was untouched and cold on the plates. It looked as if the men had risen from their meal and never returned. Moore searched the lighthouse from top to bottom. He climbed to the lantern room at the top of the tower. The lamp was trimmed and ready to light. The oil reservoirs were full. The wicks were fresh. The equipment had been prepared for the night's operation as if it were any ordinary evening, but the men were not there. Moore searched the island. He searched every building. He searched the landing platforms and the steep cliff paths. He called their names into the wind that howled off the Atlantic. The wind answered. The men did not. Mòr returned to the Hesperus and reported what he had found. The captain searched the island himself with the crew. No sign of the three keepers. No bodies on the rocks below. No personal effects beyond the walls of the lighthouse. One set of oilskins was missing. The oilskins were the heavy waterproof coats the keepers wore in storms. The fact that one set was gone suggested that at least one man had gone outside intentionally. But why would all three men leave the lighthouse in a storm with the table set for a meal? The answer might be in the lighthouse log. The logbook was found in the duty room. The final entry was dated December 15, but that entry was written by Ducat on December 13. He had apparently made a mistake with the date. The log contained entries that disturbed everyone who read them. December 12, Ducat wrote that the storm was the worst he had experienced in 20 years of service. He noted that MacArthur had been crying. MacArthur was a veteran seaman. He had survived storms in the open Atlantic on fishing boats. He was not a man who cried. Ducat wrote that the men were praying. This was unusual. Lighthouse keepers were practical men who trusted their equipment. They did not write about prayer in the official logbook. The final entry was on December 13. The storm was described as still raging. The log said the wind had not dropped for 3 days. The sea was described as a mountain of white water. Then the entries stopped. There were no entries for December 14 or December 15. The official log had been abandoned. A separate slate was found in the duty room. The slate was used for temporary notes that would later be transcribed into the log. The slate recorded that the storm ended on the morning of December 15. It noted that Ducat was calm. It noted that MacArthur had stopped crying. It noted that the men gave thanks to God for their survival, and then nothing. The slate was dated December 15. That was the last record of the keepers of Eilean Mòr. The official investigation by the Northern Lighthouse Board determined the men were swept from the island by a rogue wave over 100 feet high. Iron railings had been bent flat against the rock. A stone block weighing more than a ton was displaced. The theory: Ducat and Marshall went outside to inspect storm damage. MacArthur saw them swept into the sea from inside. He ran out to save them without his oilskins and was swept in after them. That is the official verdict. But there is a problem. The storm Ducat described did not exist. No other station recorded unusual weather. Sailors reported clear skies and moderate seas across the Minch. The worst storm Ducat had ever seen was invisible to every other observer on the west coast of Scotland. Or the storm was something else entirely. Theories multiplied. Some believe one keeper murdered the others. The overturned chair, the weeping, the prayer, but no motive has ever been suggested. Some believe the men were taken by sea creatures from Hebridean folklore. Some believe foreign agents abducted them, since the lighthouse was strategic. Some believe isolation drove them mad. 3 men alone for weeks on a rock in a Scottish winter where the sun rises for 6 hours. The mind in those conditions is not always reliable, and some believe the simplest explanation. The Atlantic Ocean does not need a reason. A single swell from a storm 1,000 miles away can sweep away anything in its path. The lighthouse continued to operate after the disappearance, but the keepers who followed reported strange things. Voices calling from the landing platform, footsteps climbing the stone stairs when they were alone, doors found open that had been locked. They named the ghost the Phantom of the Flannans. The Northern Lighthouse Board dismissed these reports. The keepers kept reporting them anyway. The lighthouse was automated in 1971. No keeper has lived on the island in more than 50 years. The light still burns every night, sweeping across the Minch, tended by machines. No one climbs the stairs now. No one writes in the logbook. No one listens for footsteps. The lighthouse has not solved the mystery. It has simply stopped asking. The Flannan Isles remain uninhabited. Eilean Mòr is visited only by maintenance crews. The lighthouse rises from the gray rock in silent reproach. It saw everything, and it will say nothing. 3 men walked out of that door and did not walk back in. The sea is older than memory, and it keeps its secrets better than any vault. The Atlantic does not owe us an explanation. It never has. It never will.